Hello and welcome to the next part of this Flask Python tutorial series. Today we're going to be taking a look at how we can actually create some fancy templates using Bootstrap, and also how we can actually separate our code into what's called blueprints in Flask. So this is where you can actually separate your code. Now, I have actually done quite a large amount of work since we last did a tutorial on this application. So what I'm going to be doing is going through what I've done. This of course is going to be an application for the course that I'm doing for Packt Publishing. That course is all about microservices. So if you're interested in microservices, I'll leave links in the description, cards and end screens as well. Let's now go straight into the tutorial, and I can actually show you some of the code that I've been getting up to. So what we've done here, and you can see there's a large amount of change compared to what it was last time. What I'll do is I'll go through each section step by step. Now, if we go into the app.py file, we can see quite a large amount of change. Before, this is where all the roots were held. This was also where the form class for the login form was held. That's all being removed. They are in their own little blueprints, and I'll be showing you what that all means in just a second. So let's go through this file line by line. We are importing Flask like normal. We're also importing Bootstrap. These two are the kind of the magic where the blueprints happen. We're importing home and user from home blueprint and user blueprint. Down here we're starting the Flask application. This is basically what we were doing beforehand, but we're actually also creating a Bootstrap. Down here we've got some configuration, we've got some secret keys and a cross-site forgery key. We've also registering our blueprints down here, and then lastly what we're doing is we're running the debug server, and we're putting it on that host, and debug is set to true. This is what we were doing beforehand. However, this file, like I mentioned, was also doing all of the legwork for all of the files, so all the login and all of that kind of stuff. Now we're going to have different blueprints. We're going to have a blueprint for the order, for the product, and for the invoice, and all of that kind of good stuff. We'll get onto those later on down this tutorial series, but I just want to show you what a blueprint actually is, and how to define it and so forth. So here on line 14 and 15, we are registering these blueprints, the home blueprint and the user blueprint. Now these are actually in here. So we have home and we have user. And each of these blueprints has an init. And basically what we're doing in each of these inits, so we are creating the blueprints. So we are saying user blueprint. Now this is the thing that we register in the app.py, is an instance of a new blueprint. We're giving it the name of user and so forth, and we're importing the roots. Same again in this one here. However, this one we are defining a templates folder, and I'll talk about what that means in just a second when I talk about Bootstrap. Let's now go back to the app.py. This is where we're registering. So we have the home and we have the user. They are defined in those inits. So we have user and we have here home. And so we have registered those. And basically that means that Flask looks into those things, those areas, those modular places of code for the roots, which means that we have a roots.py here in the home, and I'll go through these templates in just a second in terms of all these roots and stuff. Now in this roots.py file, we've seen a lot of this stuff before. This was what you would have seen in perhaps the app.py file. We are rendering the templates. That means we have the ability to access templates, but we're also importing forms. So we have a forms.py here, and this is where all the forms for the home section will be. So here we have a login form. This is the same class that we created in the app.py file in the previous tutorials. Exactly the same. We have the email, the password, and the submit fields. We have a login form class here, which means that we can import that and use that in different blueprints. And it's in the home blueprint at the moment, which is what we are importing. And of course, we are importing the blueprint itself, which means that we can use the @ symbol, so @blueprint.root. It's kind of like how we were doing it with just the app.py file. And then here we're just rendering the template. So I've got some new roots. This one here is the home, so slash is just home. Slash login is what we had before with just the login file. But now we can do login.index.py, and the reason why we can do that is if I go to the init.py here, we are designating where the template folder is, which is in templates, which means that we have these templates available to us. These are the templates that I've created. If I go into the login.py, into the login.html file, it's essentially the same as it was before. However, there are some Bootstrap bits and pieces in here. I'll be talking about those in just a second. Here we've got the login form. We are creating some divs around the various input blocks. We can also supply classes to these input fields and the labels using this. So class underscore equals, and then you can supply a class, a CSS class, into those things. I'll talk about Bootstrap in just a second, but let's continue with the blueprints. If I go back to the roots.py here, we can now go down to the logout. Logout, I'm just setting it to login for now. There's going to be some work with sessions and so forth. I've also created some more. So we've got products and we've got orders and we've got an order thank you as well. These go back to their designated order sort of templates. So this order thank you.html would go to order and then thank you.html, which is here. If I go into the user's roots.py file, we can see that we have API endpoints in here. So I've actually started creating the API endpoints that I'm going to be using for the Packt microservices course. These are essentially just placeholders at the moment. If I scroll down here, we've got API for a username, API for users, and then we have register and login. What I'm doing in the users is I'm actually supplying a users.json file. This is in here. So if I go into database, user.json, we have this JSON file. That is what is returned when we go into API.users. What we're doing here on line 4 is we're saying with that file, we're opening that file as F, so that's the file handler. We're then equaling data to JSON.load of that file handler, which means that data has that JSON file, which means that here we can do a JSON.dumps of that with an indentation of 4. And down here, what we're doing is we've got API user username. That is a parameter that we're supplying to that root. And what we're doing is we're checking if the username that we've supplied, if it isn't in that data variable, which is in the JSON, then we are returning a 404. If it is, though, we are returning a response, and we're pulling out that user from there. What I'm going to do is just show you this as it works, because I appreciate that this is quite a lot to digest. If we go back to the users.json, you'll see that we have a JSON sort of object here that has different JSON objects within it, but they are sort of indexed or keyed by the username, which means that I can go API/users/ and then the username, and I'll pull out that section if the username is Peter Fisher, or this section if the username is Claire White. Let me just demonstrate that for you now. Let's go back to the browser and actually see these things in action. So in the browser, I've gone to API/users and I've pulled out all of this JSON here. This is the JSON file that I created in the database folder. And it's basically just a massive JSON object. Obviously, this will be coming back from the database when I get around to actually creating the database. Essentially, though, what I want to do is just sort of wire up the Python code first and then put the database on later on. But this is in that JSON structure. What I can do is actually pull out a specific user from this JSON object, because the users are actually keyed by the username in this JSON object. So for example, if I was to take out Claire White here, and if I was to run API user and then Claire White, we'll just get Claire White's bits and pieces, her details. And again, if I was to change that from Claire White to something else, so perhaps if I did Peter_Fisher, that is what we're going to get. And of course, there's other users and so forth. Like I've mentioned, this will be running database queries in the back end later on when I have the database running, but I just want to get these APIs actually returning something first, and then I can decide how the database is going to be structured. So let's dive back into the code and actually see what was going on when we were running those things. So back in the code, let's go and see how those things were being returned. So this is the first one, the API users. That is just going to make a response passing in a JSON dump of the data. Data again is what we're setting here. This is the database.users.json file, which I've created up in here, sorry. So that will just return this blob of JSON. And the next one was the API /user/username. Username is the parameter that we're supplying to this route, and it also gets added to the controller here, so the user passing that in as the first argument. What we're doing here is we're checking whether the username is within the data collection that we're pulling out from the users.json file up there. If it isn't, so if it is not in data, then we abort with a 404. And again, the reason why I can do this is because the username, if I go back to the user.json, is the thing that these user objects are keyed by. Now, we could be keying them by ID or whatever, but this is just how I can do it quite easily, keying them out as a string. So we've got the Peter Fisher, John Davies, and Claire White, and I pulled out Claire White and myself. And if I go back into the routes.py, we can see that we are aborting. We're actually returning a 404 if the username is not in the data. Also, if it is in the data, we are just returning that. So we're doing a make response, passing in a dump, a JSON dump of data, but we're getting the key, we're getting the object that's keyed by the username, like so. So that's the API endpoints that I've created so far. I've also started working on a products API. This is the JSON structure that I'm kind of thinking for the order management system, but that's kind of in development at the moment. If I go back to the roots here, we're also going to have a register API and a login API and so forth. This will be what's used by the login form. When you go and log in, it's going to create an API call to actually log in. And again, if we do the register form, we're actually going to register and so forth. Let's go and talk about these forms then. Let's go and talk about how we've actually created them using Bootstrap. I guess the first thing I'm going to do is actually show you the browser. Let's go back to the browser here and actually show you the forms. So if I just go back to the home page, we can just see that we're spitting out homepage here. But if I go to /login, we can see that we have a login form, and the login form is actually using Bootstrap, which we'll be talking about in just a second as I just show you all of these things. If I hit login, then we get the form is invalid also. Now, if I load up developer tools in Safari here, let's bring that up a little bit, we can see in the head we have a CDN Cloudflare of Twitter Bootstrap 3.37. Now, I'm going to show you how I did that, how I actually put that in, and we also have the jQuery as well that we've added. If I scroll down here, we can see, if I pull these out, that we've actually got form groups, and we've got pull rights, and we've got all sorts of other bits and pieces, form controls that the Bootstrap has as CSS classes. So let's go and take a look at how I've managed to get Bootstrap running within this Python Flask application. Let's go back into the code and let's take a look at one of these templates. Let's go into the login.index file. We can see that we're extending, this is the Ginger 2 sort of syntax to extend bootstrap base.html. So that we are extending the base HTML file, and that is what is used to pull out all of those third-party bits and pieces. So the jQuery, the Bootstrap, the CSS, and so forth. But how did I actually get Bootstrap running in this Flask application? Well, what I did is in, where did it go? In requirements.txt, what I've done is I've added some more bits and pieces, including the Flask Bootstrap package. We've also got here other bits and pieces like the WTF forms that you're used to, and the Flask extension of that, and of course Flask itself. We've also got other bits and pieces. What I've done is I've frozen my requirements file, and I've committed that into this GitHub repository that I'm using, because what I've been doing is I've been creating this when I'm commuting to work and so forth, or when I'm somewhere else on a different machine. So by having a Git repository, I can share this, but I needed to have the requirements file frozen in order to have these packages installed on those various machines. So we've got the Bootstrap here. That is the thing that we're using. And if I go to the app.py file, so that is in the root of the app directory here, app.py file, we are creating a Bootstrap variable, and that will just call the Bootstrap from this import Flask _ Bootstrap, passing in the app like so, which means that we have access to Bootstrap and the way Bootstrap can manipulate the front end, if you will, of this. If I was to go into home, if I was to go into the roots, you'll see that we're not actually playing with Bootstrap within the controllers, and I guess you shouldn't be doing that from the back end of the code. It's essentially what you're using in the front end. So if I go back into the templates here, if I was to go into the login, we can call the extension of Bootstrap, or we can extend this to be Bootstrap, which will then include those third-party libraries as CSS and JavaScript, which means that we have the ability to use all of these lovely CSS classes to do grids and other bits and pieces like that. And also we can use the JavaScript as well that Bootstrap and jQuery provide. So that is what I've got up to with this application. I do appreciate that this is a slightly different tutorial than before, because I'm not actually demonstrating how to write the code. I'm actually talking about what I've written and how it works. So it is a different style of tutorial. I do apologize if you were expecting me actually writing code. I have to get this application written, and I do think that the next few tutorials will be very similar to this kind of style, where I'm actually writing this in various locations, where perhaps I'm commuting to a client, or perhaps I'm in a coffee shop, or perhaps, I'm just doing it in the evening, and therefore I can't actually do this as a tutorial. Now, as I've mentioned before, this application will be used in the course that I'm creating for Packt Publishing. That course is all about microservices in Python. So if you're interested in learning microservices, then do check out that course. I'll put links in the description, in the end screens, and in the cards as well. And if you haven't done so already, please do check out the howtocodewell.net website. This is going to be home of the YouTube tutorials and the videos that I'm putting on YouTube. So this one here is the Microsoft Buys GitHub. This was the video I did on my opinions for that. We also have some courses. Not all of the courses are on here. This is the Udemy for Docker. This is the PHP stuff. Udemy and Skillshare. We also have links to Docker in Motion. This is the course I did for Manning Publications. We also have a shop, and in this shop we have various books for different programming languages. These are books that I recommend. The one for Python when you're learning Flask is this book here. This is Flask Web Development, which is this one just here, if I highlight that. So do check that out. These links also give me some help as well, which is pretty awesome. And again, if I go into the courses, We have some free YouTube courses that I've been creating. So we have the Docker, the Linux, and we have at the moment the PHP command line course. I'm going to be slowly adding more courses as time goes on. But if you haven't done so already, please do check out howtocodewell.net. Thanks ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone. I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.